What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Mike Kaye. The latest episode of the No Huddle Show. We are in my home. This is our end of season podcast. We're going to get into some review for the season and some look ahead to the off season, but we got to talk about the big news of the week. Mike Groh has joined this podcast as a co-host. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I don't know what to do with Golden Tate.
I was actually thinking like he was doomed from the moment he said that out loud. That's kind of you have a take / opinion about him. But one of his biggest, I mean, this has nothing to do with his coaching, but public image and the lack of support he had outside of the building had a lot to do with his inability to like properly convey a message.
Yeah, and I think, it's weird because it kind of...
By the way, he was let go, and so was Carson Walch, if you weren't aware.
Thanks, Zack.
I'm saying we didn't address that specifically.
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably somewhat aware, I would imagine.
Maybe a little bit.
Maybe you found out via Eagles Extra, which you should sign up for, free for 2 weeks. Kind of get all of our takes on the end of the year stuff. There's going to be a lot of transition. The offensive coordinator coaching search, if Jim Schwartz gets hired... By the end of this podcast, maybe we'll get some defensive coordinator news
sure.
as well.
I mean, you would think the Browns would make they're interviewing Josh McDaniels today, I think.
Right, and Josh McDaniels, that's a dream job for Josh McDaniels. He grew up an Ohio kid.
Did you see the Josh McDaniels stuff about Matt Rule?
Yeah, oh my God,
the same agent, and the agent, so apparently, I mean, this has nothing to do with the Eagles, but it just like kind of blew my mind a little bit. It's because it's McDaniels of all people. Yeah. But Matt Rule, while his agent was negotiating the contract with the Panthers, McDaniels is getting ready to fly to Carolina to interview for a job that he wasn't going to get, that his agent didn't tell him.
So a couple of things on that.
Like, that's just crazy. That's, like, McDaniels would do that to somebody else. But...
Yeah, a couple of things on that. One, if you're his agent, Josh might not accept the job or accept the job and then leave. So there goes your commission.
Yeah, that's true. He never got the commission for the Colts job. I didn't even think of that.
When somebody's offering your head coaching client $70 million... You got to take it. I mean,
that takes priority over
the
flaky guy.
Yeah, sorry. That commission.
Sorry, guy. That was his text message to him, probably.
Josh was seen as one of the more high-quality candidates out there. You'll get another job, buddy.
Yeah, one day.
You're also probably the highest-paid offensive coordinator in the league, I would imagine.
I wish all the contracts for coordinators were public like they are for colleges.
I wish they were public on assistant coaches. We'd have a lot more.
Well, like I'm saying in general. It's like in at least if it's not a private university, you can see the salary for every single coach on the staff. So that's why you'll see I'll see the recruiting coordinators making like $400,000. I'm like, man, I'm in the wrong profession.
Yeah, tell me about it.
But anyway, so back to Eagles.
So Mike Groh.
Yeah, Mike Groh. Sign up for Eagles Extra. Mike Rowe can sign. I didn't even mean it to sound like that, but
grow your audience and grow the information that you receive.
If Mike Groh joined our staff, would you guys be more willing to? No, they probably would all unsubscribe.
I'm pretty sure people
were not fans of Mike Groh. It's my impression I got over the 2 years he had the job. But okay, so Mike Groh let go. We should talk about this. We'll talk about the Mike Groh part of it, then we'll talk about who they could replace him with. The Mike Groh part of it. I mean, obviously the offense. He got too much blame. I think most people probably agree on. I mean, maybe the fan base doesn't. He got too much blame relative to the fact that he doesn't run the offense. But the facts are the offense was not as good with him there. It regressed. It wasn't consistent. Struggled to score at the beginning of games. Didn't have enough breakout performances. And when they did, it would be like when the defense also gave up a lot of points. The timing was never there. But I think Mike Groh, there was no way he was ever going to really last that long. I don't know if he had usually the offensive coordinator is a guy that has a future as a head coach, and he just never carried himself like someone who either wanted that or was ever going to be that. So I don't know what he was doing behind the scenes to get Doug's trust or why he earned that job over Duce Staley. But I think in retrospect, it probably wasn't the right move. But I mean, I know you have an opinion about why he never succeeded here.
So he's basically the passing game coordinator because Stoutland controls the run game, essentially. So that's why it made sense that he got the job over Duce as a wide receivers coach. And a former quarterback. Talking to players, especially last year, he's a very good teacher and a very good wide receivers coach. He's considered a very good wide receivers coach around the league. I think, some guys can be really good at their station, and that can build confidence for an employer. That said, doesn't mean they necessarily need to get a promotion. And I think Mike was put in a situation where he was an internal candidate. A fan base always wants somebody external, almost always.
Yeah. Although I've seen a lot of fans pulling for Duce in the last couple of days.
If Duce didn't play for this team, nobody would care.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
I think he was a better candidate at the time than Groh.
Absolutely.
I get your point, but I still it's still in retrospect it should have been Duce.
I've said several times on this podcast that I saw Duce Staley coach in person as an offensive coordinator at the East West Shrine games a couple of years ago, and he impressed the heck out of me.
He did the best coaching job of his career with Miles Sanders this year.
Yeah,
and Boston Scott. Yeah,
phenomenal. The problem is, and we'll get into this a little bit later, the issue with the Eagles' offense is they're not as imaginative as they were before. And if the guy's already part of the coordinating collective,
he's part of that already.
His voice is in there already. So what are you getting out of it?
Unless and if he's not a part of that already, then Doug clearly didn't trust him enough to be a part of that.
Say?
Yeah.
My thing with Groh replacing Reich, the offensive coordinator job here is somewhat undefined. You can say he's the passing game coordinator. Well, what does that exactly mean? You've got a former quarterback, offensive coordinator, head coach who's also calling the plays. You don't know what his hubris is. You don't know how much control he has. Frank Reich and John DeFilippo were significantly more experienced as coaches than Press Taylor and Mike Groh. So maybe Doug Peterson decided to take more responsibility on himself. We don't know that. I know some people have said, well, I don't think they would have switched up the thing. We don't know that. But the optics of Frank Reich had a really solid year as a first-year head coach with the Colts. Blew everybody away with his charm and how the offense played the first 2 years that Doug and Frank were here. They won a Super Bowl. So right there, the measuring stick is very, very high. Mike Groh did not need to be Frank Reich. Fans have admitted, I think fans would have been fine if they were getting to NFC Championship games and being contenders and all that stuff. Frank Reich, from an optics standpoint, is kind of like Nick Foles in a way. He was there, he's in your mind as a guy who was extremely influential in the biggest moment in Eagles history. And somebody tweeted at me that both Foles and Frank became folk heroes after that. And that's fair. You're living up to a legend because you're remembering the good times. And I think from that perspective, Mike Groh was never going to get to where he needed to be. Was not as good on the mic. Fans have said, oh, well, only writers care about that. No, that's not true. People complained about the Golden Tate thing.
Well, he's saying stuff that becomes a story because he did a bad job of messaging. Like the Golden Tate thing was especially bad because that was a bad reflection on the entire coaching staff.
Right. He didn't win press conferences, and that's fine. Doug Peterson rarely wins press conferences, but that combined with a drop-off in production is like a really bad mix, obviously. And obviously, maybe Mike Groh was a smart mind, but he wasn't as smart as Frank Reich. Or maybe Doug Peterson
didn't trust him like he trusted Frank Reich.
Right, which is fair because, again, Frank Reich had
been in the
experience.
business for a long time, yeah.
Frank Reich had more offensive coordinator experience than Doug Peterson did before they got that job. He had more play calling experience for sure because
Doug didn't have any.
Right, exactly. So, we'll get into this more when we talk about the candidates, but Frank Reich and Mike Groh, if you were doing an interview with both of them, completely different candidates and completely probably different strengths and backgrounds. Frank Reich was a quarterbacks coach, a wide receivers coach, an offensive coordinator for multiple years before getting the job. Mike Groh had been fired by his father, had some rough moments in college, had some rough moments as a passing game coordinator with the Rams. He had been around and not succeeded in bigger roles. And yet Doug Peterson promoted him and kept him after a first year where it was very clear that there was a disconnect between production and the new offensive coordinator. So Doug Peterson deserves a ton of blame for this. And I think he's eluded the blame publicly for a pretty long time.
It's almost as if Mike Groh has been the scapegoat for their problems.
Oh, go figure. You brought up Duce earlier. We should mention Doug Peterson was on WIP this morning and said that, everything's on the table. When asked about Duce Staley.
I mean, it was because it was a very basic answer. I don't know if Duce is actually a candidate. I'm sure they'll talk.
Listen,
to him,
a lot of people are running with it. I've got an email already. As we're recording this, let's get into Carson Walch.
Yeah. We don't need to dwell too much on because we've talked a lot about him on this podcast.
This should be a Carson Walch size conversation.
Yeah. I think it's notable to say that he's a Mike Groh guy. He worked with him in Chicago. The Eagles only know about him because of Mike Groh.
Yeah.
Also, this will be now the fifth wide receiver coach in 5 years for Doug Peterson and 6 years overall for the Eagles.
Tradition.
Bob Bicknell was the last one who was here for more than 1 year. Although next year the wide receiver core is going to be almost entirely different. So the only one that really matters in terms of how many receivers coaches he has is J.Z. Arcega-Whiteside, and he'll be on his second one, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Walch was particularly helpful for him.
And I think that's ultimately why he was fired.
Yeah. It mostly comes down. I mean,
you can talk about the regression of Nelson and Alshon.
That's not Walch. That's them.
Yeah, that's them. They're adults at this point.
He got some credit for the way Greg Ward and Robert Davis and Deontay Burnett were all ready to go, but that's not enough.
And I think in your story about Greg Ward, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he credit the AAF wide receivers coach?
Not in my story.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was mine. I don't remember. I just remember having a conversation with him.
No, there was somebody else who wrote that. I think Paul Domowitch from.
Yeah. He credited
Inquirer,
his AAF wide receivers coach as opposed to. Yeah,
they didn't talk about the other guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think he was ready for this job. He didn't have any NFL coaching experience before he was in the CFL. That's not to say that doesn't mean you can make the transition. Others have. But pretty clearly, he wasn't ready for the pressure of coaching the Philadelphia Eagles.
Two takes here. One, I think Doug he endears himself to other coaches, and I think he's open-minded about guys to a fault. I also think that the wide receiver position typically excels when it's coached by somebody who's played at that level. Just my experience in covering Keenan McCardell, Ike Hilliard's a guy who's really kind of developed into... I mean, there are wide receivers coaches who are successful that didn't play at the NFL level, but with the way that Doug's built his ecosystem, you look at Phillip Daniels. He had Greg Lewis. I know Greg Lewis kind of fell out of favor after a year. Now he's with the Chiefs and doing pretty well. But, Tim Houck has done a really good job. He's hired Duce. All these guys, he's got an affinity for fellow former players. And I think if he's going to make another hire, I think he should really consider that. I did a list of possible replacements. The number one guy that I think they should look at is Chad O'Shea, the former offensive coordinator for the Dolphins, the former wide receivers coach.
I mean, look what he did with Devontae Parker this year.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. I think if you're Doug, you have to look into that and see the growth that he had there. He was another guy that was a really good wide receivers coach that probably wasn't a great offensive coordinator candidate.
Yeah. Well, he was let go by Miami, we should say. But not to continue being the Josh McCown guy, but I think he would be a fantastic wide receivers coach.
I do too. I agree.
The guys already know him and respect him in there. And quarterbacks know as much. I mean, he teaches wide receivers how to run routes. Like, that's part of his thing. But
I mean, what I think is interesting is when people talk about Greg Ward, they compliment him because Greg can see the field like a quarterback. And I think if that's an asset that McCown has, that he can help teach younger wide receivers, hey, this is the reason for the timing. This is how you set up your route. This is how you set up your stem for me to throw to you. Also, by the way, having a wide receivers coach who can throw to you,
even
independent of the quarterbacks.
Hey, Mike Rowe actually had a pretty good arm.
Yeah,
he was throwing around the other day. Yeah,
and he's another guy who's a former quarterback who was a wide receivers coach.
But he's not one that was a 17-year NFL quarterback,
right? But I think,
I don't know if they'll actually go the McCown route or if he even wants to retire or whatever. But I think it makes sense.
Another guy who's interesting is Sanjay Lal, who's well-traveled just based on bad luck. I mean, his staffs have pretty much always been fired, and it's not his fault.
Is McCarthy keeping him or no?
No, he's not.
Oh, okay, so he's available.
Yeah, so he's the one that's developed Michael Gallup. And Michael Gallup's shown a lot of progression as a route runner, just in general over the last 2 years. He also got Amari Cooper integrated when he got there pretty quickly. He's a guy who's well-respected around the league. The other guy that I'd bring up is Ike Hilliard. So, like I said, he's the guy that developed Jamison Crowder.
Bring a Giants receiver. I like it.
Terry McLaurin had an incredible rookie year when compared to his college production, which Howie Roseman even acknowledged. So that could be a guy that they look into as well. He bounced around a little bit and then spent the last 5 years in Washington, and I think he'd be a really good candidate. He fits the ecosystem. He's a smart guy. Had a really good NFL career. So he's somebody that they will respect. I will say this, from what I've heard, past wide receivers coaches have had trouble kind of getting through to veteran wide receivers. There
might not be many veterans on this team next year.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you need a big boy to talk to other big boys, if that makes sense. And I think a maturity thing needs to kind of come into play there. That's why I think Josh McCown would be excellent. That's why I think Chad O'Shea, who's been coaching since in the NFL for almost 20 years. Sanjay Lal is renowned for some of his work. Like, you have to have an authoritative presence. We've talked about Press Taylor before about needing that presence. I think having a wide receivers coach and an authoritative offensive coordinator would kind of help Press Taylor set kind of boundaries.
I agree. So let's get into who he. So there was a report that Jim Caldwell and Kevin O'Connell are two guys that the Eagles are looking at. I had Kevin O'Connell on the list of candidates that I wrote. I didn't even think of Jim Caldwell. He makes a lot of sense for what the Eagles best case scenario. They bring in a veteran coach who has been called plays before, who's been a head coach before, to kind of be another like a Frank Reich type voice in the room. If there's a problem with a guy like that, it's that he could turn that into a head coaching job pretty quickly. So then you have to hire another one. But I mean, you deal with that when it comes. But Jim Caldwell's great. I'm intrigued by Mike Kafka, which fans might laugh when they first hear that, but he's considered like a rising star in coaching circles. He's a quarterbacks coach in Kansas City. He's played a huge role in the development of Patrick Mahomes. So I think Carson Wentz would listen to him. And he's a young guy who can relate to these other players, like the receiver. I think it's better to have a young coach as a receivers coach or the offensive coordinator than maybe the quarterbacks coach that's spending a lot of time. But what do you think? Who are your top guys?
So Jim Caldwell, to me, would be an absolute surefire slam dunk, in my opinion. We'll get into that a little bit later, but here's the reason why Jim Caldwell and Kevin O'Connell make sense as possible candidates. So Jim Caldwell was Frank Reich's head coach when Frank Reich was a wide receivers and quarterbacks coach in Indianapolis during his first stint from 2009 to 2011. So Doug Peterson is going into his coaching tree to kind of get more information, it appears. Getting guys that are familiar with potential candidates, which is smart. That's what happens when you have an extensive coaching tree. Kevin O'Connell played under John DeFilippo with the Jets, and then his first coaching job as a quarterbacks coach was with the Browns in 2015. Who was the offensive coordinator? John DeFilippo. He's part of the Matt Cavanaugh tree. They both kind of grew up together, I guess. Matt Cavanaugh, who was the offensive coordinator for the Redskins, took another role this past year, and that's when Kevin O'Connell kind of became the offensive coordinator from quarterbacks coach with Washington. I thought he did a pretty good job this year. If you look at the game in Washington against the Eagles, I thought he called a really good game. And he's had to integrate some veteran players. You look at Adrian Peterson, you look at some of these guys, Case Keenum,
I mean, he had to develop Dwayne Haskins. He was playing pretty well by the end of the year.
Yeah. And he's had to build an authority rather quickly. He is a guy who in 2018 coached Mark Sanchez. Several years prior, he was Mark Sanchez's backup. So, he's a guy that's had to grow up really quickly on the job.
He had to stop with the Patriots, too. So
Yeah, he was drafted by the Patriots in the third round. He was supposed to be Brady's longtime backup. Didn't really
one
work
of many
out.
that were supposed to be Tom Brady's backup. But yeah, so I think those are some of the interesting names. In the story I had, I also listed some of the bigger names like Jay Gruden, Pat Shurmur, who bring that veteran. Jay Gruden's more intriguing, but he probably also would want to call plays wherever he goes, kind of guy. Some people were mentioning Todd Monken. I don't really know that much about him.
Interesting.
I saw Ruben Frank mention the Ravens quarterbacks coach. who has ties to Andy Reid and Doug Peterson, and he's done a great job at Lamar. Obviously, he might have eyes on play calling, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, the reason why you wouldn't go with Todd Monken is a report came out that he was basically crap talking the Browns organization as an offensive coordinator before games. So
the Browns are a fun team.
Yeah, real fun.
But I think those are a lot of the candidates you'll see mentioned. There's probably some secret one that we're not even aware of, but that's kind of going to be a big topic for the Eagles over the next couple weeks until free agency starts kicking into full swing. Before we do move on a little bit, we should touch on the Howie Roseman press conference real quick. You were there. I had to cover the Joe Judge intro stuff and the story I did on him, but I did watch it. I did read all the quotes and see all the stories. And number one, Howie still does the thing where he talks a lot and doesn't actually say all that much, but I do think he was more revealing than he's ever been.
I agree.
He seemed contrite and admitted where he was wrong, and I think my biggest takeaway was that they're going to do a full-on shakeup of this roster this offseason. That's kind of the impression I got. He talked about their need to get younger. He was non-committal when he was asked about certain guys, Alshon Jeffrey, Malcolm Jenkins, Jason Peters. I think they're going to make a concerted effort again. And I think the most interesting thing is that he basically admitted that they thought they had a 3-year window, and they didn't accomplish it in those 3 years. They won a lot and all that.
They won too early, really.
Yeah, they won in the first year of the 3-year window, which is not usually what you see. But that's kind of the takeaway I got. So I think there's going to be some surprising guys who don't come back this year. I think there's going to be some guys they get rid of that maybe we're not thinking of. But this is going to look a lot different next year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think from my perspective, Howie Roseman was way more prepared for this press conference than Doug Peterson was. It was not even close.
I mean, Doug was busy rubbing a water bottle on his mouth.
Yeah, that was
up. This one of the funniest videos I've ever seen. Who did he wink at, by the way? Do you know?
No, I asked EJ Smith from Philly or Inquirer.com because he was right there. It was him and Dan Gallen from Penn Live. They were right there, and I'm like, I really hope it's one of the two of them. EJ said that he thinks it was Derek Gunn that he was.
Okay.
Hashtag the source.
And by the way, we didn't even mention this before, but Doug, whether he meant to lie or not, said that Mike Groh and Carson Walch are coming back.
Yeah,
and then, we should litigate that.
Let's talk about that.
But, so what were your thoughts on Howie, though, before we touch on that?
Yeah. I thought Howie... I wrote this, that I thought Howie's press conference was a mix, a tad bit of transparency.
As transparent as Howie Roseman would be.
A spoonful of self-awareness and he knows. He knows that this was not ideal. Some of his answers were perplexing, but I see his logic in them. Not that I agree with the logic.
Nelson Aguilar being one of the 10 fastest receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, the Jannard Avery thing, that they traded for the future when you could have traded a third-round pick for Emmanuel Sanders is the most asinine thing I've ever heard in a press conference. Especially when he did mention how they've said this several times. Joe Douglas used to say this all the time too. They talk to the staff before they make every move. Well, the staff is either lying through their teeth when they evaluate somebody, or they immediately just don't like the goods when they arrive.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of disconnect here. Predictably, they cut the press conference pretty short. Nobody got to ask about LJ Fort or Zack Brown.
Or even just how they were cutting guys days after they played a lot.
Somebody repeated. There were 2 repeat questions. It was a rough one. I didn't even get a question in, and I was furious. But look, I think the most telling thing he said was they need a youth movement, essentially, and he's right. He really kind of laid it on thick that they have 10 draft picks, which I get. Look.
He's putting pressure on himself to hit on those picks. So.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, too, as we go into this offseason. They are betting wildly on Andy Weidl. Really, they got to nail this draft class. He made a point to say that they've only had 10 picks over the last 2 years, so they've had to hit on them. The majority of them. Guess what? They haven't. And I think this is going to be the most. I mean, everybody says it every year. This is the most important draft ever. This is going to be the most important draft
for the future. Yeah,
draft in a really long time because they're sitting there at 21. They're going to have an extra 3rd round pick. They're probably going to have 2 extra 4th round picks from the comp pick formula. They need to make a splash. This is a team that has been aggressive in trade ups. They're probably going to have to trade up to get the wide receiver they want based on the mock drafts that I've seen and based on the mock drafts that I've been doing myself. Because in those teams, there are teams that need wide receiver help pretty significantly. I think this team needs a corner or a wide receiver in that first round. They're pretty easy to predict, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went after a defensive tackle. That'd be
the most Eagles thing ever. Everyone in Philly wants a receiver, and they get a defensive tackle.
Listen,
they would be so mad.
Fletcher Cox has gone out of his way to say, playing next to 7 different guys was really tough for him this year. He played next to like 6 different guys last year. So it would not shock me. Also, Fletcher Cox is getting up there and is really expensive. So I could see the logic there. I don't think the fan base would be thrilled, but what are you going to do? If they could get Derek Brown, though, woo! You probably need to trade into the top 10 for that. But yeah, I think Howie made some astute points. I think he made some astute points about trading at the trade deadline and how I've said it several times. Bad teams can offer better packages if they're offering the same, round of picks because bad teams are going to have higher picks in each round. The JJ Arcega-Whiteside stuff. I don't think the organization was 100% on board with that pick. And I'll say that just from reading the tea leaves. That's a guess.
Well, McLean actually reported that the other day.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Howie's lukewarm endorsement of him also compared to, he made a point to say, look, 3 guys who had less than 40 catches in college per season, really balled out this year. Darius Slayton, Terry McLaurin, and DK Metcalf. All 3 players whooped on the Eagles this year.
I will say part of McLean's report was that I guess Metcalf failed a physical in his thing with the Eagles. That's why they didn't pick him. Just saying, they still should have picked him.
Well, it's also probably why Howie kind of deferred with explaining why.
Yeah.
It was probably maybe lower on their board. But what I'll say is this. If they learned a lesson from this, maybe the Eagles benefit. You and I have been very quick to critique the Joe Douglas form of player acquisition. Hey, I know that guy, or hey, he was productive in college. Sometimes the evaluation has to outweigh the production in college, and that's what happened with Terry McLaurin and DK Metcalf and obviously Darius Slayton. So that's interesting to me. But speaking of the Giants and the Redskins, I think we do need to talk about the news that's around the division. Ron Rivera obviously hired by the Redskins. The Giants hired Joe Judge, and the Cowboys hired Mike McCarthy. What do you think of that trio of NFC East new head coaches?
I think it's at the very least more formidable than the coaches they replaced.
Absolutely.
I think it puts a little more pressure on the Eagles to not start slow. Mm-hmm. I don't know if necessarily all 3 teams are going to be good next year or anything. I think the Giants still have a lot of moves. They have a lot of money, but they have a lot of moves they have to make. Mm-hmm. The Redskins will inevitably end 7-9. They just kind of though Ron Rivera is a good coach. But these are like competent coaches, whereas Jason Garrett was not. Jay Gruden was a fine play caller, but he kind of got worse as time went on, it seemed like. Mm-hmm. And Pat Shurmur is Pat Shurmur. Right. So Joe Judge is the biggest mystery here. I think, it's going to depend on how he fills out his coaching staff. Nobody knows what kind of philosophy they're going to do. He sounds like a real Bill Belichick disciple in that he's just saying we're going to put the best players on the field and then figure out the best offense and defense to run. I'm sure he has an idea of what he's going to do. His press conference was impressive. I think he has the right mindset of evaluation, and it's even just like the whole production versus physical traits and stuff. Based on his press conference, I don't think he really even factors in production at all. He was talking a lot about how you look at everything, and even Dave Gettleman was talking like that. And I think the Eagles need to think like that going forward. But I think that there definitely is more pressure on the Eagles. It's going to be harder to win the division and make the playoffs if you're starting 5-7 every year.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's hard anyway, but
For sure. So of those three guys, who do you think is A, the most setups for success, and B, who do you think, just based on prior history, their pedigree, will be the most successful immediately?
that's interesting. 'Cause I'm not as high on Mike McCarthy as a lot of other people seem to be. The whole like media tour where he's talking about how analytical he is now is just so transparent to me. I think he's the most set up to succeed right away. I think Judge, if he gets the right support and if the Giants make the right decisions, like he has the franchise quarterback in place, I think Jones is legit. He has Saquon Barkley, Darius Slayton. They have some young defensive talent. This is going to be the offseason that defines their entire franchise probably. I wouldn't be surprised if they were competitive next year, kind of like the Eagles 2016, and then you transition to 2017. I think they would be. Nobody knows what Judge is. He's like the biggest wild card in the NFL almost.
Time will be the judge.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I saw somebody point out they should draft Jerry Jeudy from Alabama, so it could be Judge
Greg
Jeudy.
Allman from the Athletic.
So, yeah, that's who it was. That's genius. But he's kind of wild card. If he's a competent coach and if he's as smart as everybody says he is, and everybody I've talked to says that he is, like that's the team that you can start. I mean, the Giants were competitive with the Eagles this year with Pat Shurmur.
Yeah. He's interesting. So, of the guy, you're completely right about Mike McCarthy. I think he's the most set up. He's got the best talent.
Whether he's the best coach or not is another question, I guess. But I think Rivera's probably the best one out of those three, based on what we know.
Yeah, I agree.
But even he had his flaws in Carolina, so
Ron. I think Ron has put together. I mean, the other two haven't really put together complete staff.
Judge's staff is going to kind of decide everything.
Right.
Ron, I saw Brett Bielema was a candidate for defensive coordinator.
Yikes.
No.
I'll say, look, the Cowboys have the best talent. Ron Rivera's put together a really good staff. Scott Turner, Norv Turner's son, did a really decent job down the stretch with the Panthers. I know they had trouble scoring, but they had quarterbacks in and out of the lineup. They had, Will Grier in there, so you're not really set up to succeed. But him bringing in Jack Del Rio and then moving to a 4-3 defense, I'm really intrigued by because they're in position to draft Chase Young, which I think could be a generational pick for them.
And that's one reason to be concerned about the Redskins too.
Right. And I think maybe they can get Ryan Kerrigan was banged up this year. I'm wondering, he's not really a great fit for the 4-3. I'm wondering if they can get kind of like a pretty decent haul of draft picks for him because he puts up numbers every single year and he's probably...
So update, apparently Jim Schwartz is out of the running for the Browns job.
Bummer.
Yeah. So I guess he'll be returning. There you go.
Well, there it is. Well, we don't know. I mean, we would assume as Doug Peterson
another tough guy postseason find out he's hurt story. I guess Tim McManus also reported that Josh McCown played the second half on a torn hamstring.
Oof.
That dude's 40 years old and he should not be doing that to himself.
Man, we are really recording at the best time possible and also the worst time possible, I guess. We're going to have a lot of writing to do when we're done.
And if that's the case, I feel like he's almost definitely retiring then.
Yeah, he's getting up there. That's maybe why
torn hamstring, that sounds painful.
Well, there were reports that he kind of just fell down, he kind of hunched over after the game. Maybe that's, It also explains why he was a little bit less mobile in the pocket in that fourth quarter. So let's kind of wrap it up here. This was supposed to be initially our end of the year podcast. We thought that we wouldn't have a lot of news. Let's kind of quickly rapid fire do our awards, and then let's hold off on the stay and go for our next podcast. Because it seems like we're burning.
Yeah, that could be a full podcast itself.
Yeah, which it will be next week. So let's kind of get into our awards. So MVP, I'm going Carson Wentz. I think that's clear.
Yeah, that's obvious. I mean, if you're splitting up offense, defense, I mean, we can.
Well, we're going to do an offensive player of the year.
Okay, that's fine.
Offensive player of the year, Miles. Oh, so we're going with Wentz for MVP?
Yeah.
Congratulations, Carson.
Congratulations.
Offensive player of the year, Miles Sanders. It's not even close.
But the first half of his year was bad. Is what?
Yeah.
So the funny thing,
you go with Zach Ertz?
No. Sanders, I think, makes a lot of sense. Brandon Brooks makes some sense. Jason Kelsey. I don't think it's far and away Sanders is my point, but he did. If this was the halfway point, I think we said Jordan Howard was probably the offensive MVP to that point. It's funny how
running back
that changes. Defensive, probably Malcolm Jenkins, MVP.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So,
His numbers aren't like amazing, but the impact is there, obviously.
Career high 4 forced fumbles.
Yeah.
And he played 99.4% of the snaps.
Who was your most surprising contributor this year, and who was the biggest disappointment?
That's a good question.
Most disappointing, I would say, is Alshon Jeffrey to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would say Nelson Aguilar.
Yeah. I even think J.J. Arcega-Whiteside has a case for that just because they were so high in him. And
pretty much if you were coached by Carson Walch. I guess Greg Ward would be my biggest surprise contributor. He was huge down the stretch. Really the only capable wide receiver down the stretch.
I mean, don't speak so ill of Mac Hollins.
I mean, hey, I would put Josh Perkins in there too.
Yeah,
the
fact that he contributed at all. Yeah,
all right, so let's guy that we're most excited to watch develop moving forward. Mine would be TJ Edwards because I do think he's going to have a massive.
Excited to watch develop moving forward.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a rookie. It's a guy that kind of showed you some flash.
Trying to think through the roster here. Josh Sweat. I'll say Josh Sweat. He showed a lot of flashes. I'm curious. We're going to find out how high they are in him this offseason because Vinny Curry's a free agent. So I wonder if they try to invest in a pass rushing third defensive end. If they don't, then I think that means they want to keep going with Sweat. I don't know why I said it like that. Josh Sweat.
All right. Last award I think we should do biggest injury. Because there were a lot of them.
Carson Wentz's concussion.
Yeah, that's a good one.
My answer.
I'd say Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah, those are the two obvious ones, I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
we disagreed, so we're having good radio.
That is a crazy what if Deshaun never does. I mean, he was going to get hurt eventually anyway, but if like that isn't the injury, like if he plays half the season instead of one game.
So I didn't listen to the whole WIP thing, but apparently Doug Peterson said if Schwartz doesn't get the Cleveland job, he is definitely still the DC in Philly. So I think that's...
So the fans can complain about Schwartz for at least one more year.
But I think the fair retort is, so Jim Schwartz is getting fired tomorrow?
Oh, true, yeah, Doug,
words have no meaning.
No, they don't. That's true.
Well, no, but you remember Jon Snow, he goes, we all just say things that we don't believe in. Words lack meaning, or whatever he said.
Yeah, where he's trying to, in one of the bad late season episodes.
Yeah.
All right, before we go, we did get one question on Eagles Extra. Somebody asked us, do you think it's Super Bowl or bust next season? I would say no. I think the expectation will be lower.
Lower? Yes.
Yes.
I think their window to kind of own the division is next year. They have to win this division outright, or there are going to be problems. I know that we talked about rebuilding and shaking up the roster. They have the base to succeed. Brandon Brooks, Carson Wentz, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Lane Johnson, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham,
if Malcolm is
Malik
back.
Jackson if he's back, Deshaun if he's back. Like they have
a playoff team.
Yeah, their specialists are taken care of. Like
Rick Lovato,
Rick Lovato first. Pro Bowler Rick Lovato.
We can get him on the podcast one day.
Yeah, I think we're going to just do a whole podcast about long snapping. Stay tuned. But they have the base to compete for sure, and I think to say that they're going to fall backwards or rebuild is probably being disingenuous. I think they're going to make some moves that really shake up the roster. They're going to make some non-moves that are going to surprise us. If Malcolm Jenkins is not back next year, that is massive. Because we've seen the years of Nate Allen and Quinn Demps. We've seen that.
I think Malcolm and Alshon Jeffrey's futures are the top two storylines for the Eagles this offseason.
Yeah, well, and who's going to be Carson's backup? I think that's going to be a story every year until it's solidified.
But I don't think it. But like in terms of how impactful it's going to be on the Eagles' future and all that stuff. Like Alshon is interesting just because there's like really they're going to have to give a draft pick with him and trade him somewhere to get rid of him. It'll have to be an Aqib Talib, Brock Osweiler.
And here's the thing: if they trade him before June 1st, it's a $16.4 million cap hit anyway. So it's you're in kind of non-fun territory. Howie Roseman said that he gave the guarantee in order for Alshon to take a pay cut to give them cap flexibility. It's actually going to have the reverse effect in the next year. So on that note, we're going to make like Alshon Jeffrey and head off the field. You want to do your shtick?
Yeah, sign up for Eagles Extra. That's the main thing. Go to NJ.com/Eagles. I believe there's like a link at the top of the page you can click on. The numbers keep going up. We keep getting more people. We're having a lot of fun with it. Do it. It's free for 2 weeks, as always. And it's going to be an exciting... I mean, the offensive coordinator search, the Eagles are going to have to make decisions on some guys. And then before you know it, it'll be combine, it'll be owners' meetings. I'm going to be out at the Super Bowl. I'm sure I'll see some former Eagles guys. So we'll wrap up on that note. Make sure you guys leave us some comments and write us some reviews, and we'll talk to you guys soon with our Stay or Go pod.